I'm 18 and live in Northern California, not far from the forests and mountains I've been hiking in for most of my life. I grew up outdoors. My dad used to take me camping and hiking almost every summer since I was a kid. I know the land pretty well. The smell of pine, the sound of wind moving through tall trees, the way dry needles crunch under your boots. It's all familiar, almost comforting. So last year in 2023, I decided to do something I'd been thinking about for a while. A solo overnight trip. Just one night in a place I knew well on a trail I'd hiked before with my dad. It wasn't marked on most maps and barely maintained, which is exactly why I liked it. Quiet, secluded, beautiful. This trail cut through thick forest, up and down low ridgelines, across rocky patches with great views of the valleys below. Not many people knew about it, and I'd never seen anyone else on it, even in the day. I picked this one because I wanted to camp in that specific area, but technically it was off limits. The Park Service didn't allow camping there, but I figured if I was quiet, packed light, and didn't make a fire, I'd be fine. I brought my little propane cooker, enough food for 2 days, water, a filter just in case, and a tight little one-man tent. I also had 3 knives on me, a whistle for mountain lions, and enough layers to keep warm if the temperature dropped at night. My dad dropped me at the trailhead early in the morning. I told him I'd meet the family at the pickup point at the dirt road the next afternoon. I felt excited, maybe a little nervous, but ready. The hike was amazing. I took my time, stopping to take in the views or just sit and listen. Birds, the rustle of squirrels through dry brush, the sound of a breeze hitting treetops. It all made me feel like I was doing the right thing. Alone but not lonely. The trail wound through some burned-out sections from fires years ago, then through deep, dense forest where the trees blocked out most of the sun. The light was soft and dappled, and every now and then I'd hear something big in the distance. Probably deer, but I didn't see anyone, which was exactly what I expected. By late afternoon, I reached the point where I planned to head off the trail. I had marked it in my head from a previous trip with my dad. It wasn't far, maybe a 15-minute hike into the denser woods, just over a slight hill and into a little natural clearing surrounded by trees. It wasn't visible from the trail, and I didn't leave any markers or trash behind that could give away I'd been there. The ground was soft and flat with pine needles, perfect for a tent. I set up camp, got my little tent staked down, cooked up a simple dinner, some noodles and jerky, watched the trees turn darker and darker as the sun sank behind the hills. The sky was streaked with pinks and purples for a while, then that deep blue you only see just before it goes black. I didn't have a fire, didn't want to risk it, but I had my headlamp and my phone, which I kept off most of the time to conserve battery. After cleaning up, I packed away all my food in a bag and hung it from a branch about 30 feet away from the tent. I didn't want raccoons or worse sniffing around in the night. I got into my sleeping bag and zipped up the tent by around 9. It was quiet. No sounds besides the occasional rustle of branches. I don't know when I fell asleep, but I did. Then I woke up. Suddenly. No dream. No noise. Just wide awake. Heart racing a little, like something had tugged me out of sleep. I blinked in the darkness, the tent around me dimly lit by moonlight. I lay still for a few minutes, just listening. At first, there was nothing, just silence. No wind, no movement, no night animals. And then I heard a twig snap. Not loud, but sharp. Not far. Maybe 30 or 40 feet away. I stayed still, straining my ears. I told myself it was probably just a deer or a raccoon. It wasn't uncommon to hear stuff like that at night, especially if there was food nearby. I reached quietly to my right where I had placed my buck knife, one of the bigger ones, and closed my fingers around it. Then I heard 2 footsteps, slow, deliberate, pine needles crunching under weight, not 4-legged too. It sounded like a person walking slowly. I stopped breathing for a second. Nobody should be out here. I was far off the trail, and even the trail itself was nearly invisible to most hikers. I hadn't seen another soul all day. I didn't move, just listened. The steps came a little closer, then stopped. I was lying flat on my back in my sleeping bag, barely daring to breathe. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Whoever or whatever, it wasn't walking in a straight line toward the tent. The steps were kind of moving around the area, slow, uneven, like someone checking out the camp without getting too close. Then I heard it, a humming sound, low, deep, almost tuneless but definitely human. Not singing, not a melody, just a low, steady hum, like someone had something stuck in their throat. It wasn't far, maybe 20 feet away. My blood turned cold. That was the moment I knew without a doubt that this wasn't a hiker or someone just wandering around. This was intentional. Someone was out here in the woods in the middle of the night, off trail, near an illegal campsite, humming outside a tent. I gripped the knife hard in my hand and stayed absolutely still. The humming went on for what felt like forever. I wanted to yell or make noise, but I felt frozen. Like if I moved or made a sound, whoever was out there would turn on me. It didn't feel like a robbery. It felt like whoever it was already knew I was there, like they'd been watching. Eventually, the humming stopped. Then I heard slow steps again, moving away from the tent. I didn't move. A minute later, I heard a scraping sound, like something sharp dragging on tree bark. It was rhythmic, long, slow scratches, then silence. And then, without warning, I heard the person sprint off into the woods, branches breaking, dry grass and twigs crunching loudly. Whatever it was, it ran fast, deeper into the forest in the opposite direction. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat up in the tent with the knife in my hand, my back to the wall, just listening for any sign that they'd come back. But there was nothing after that, just silence. The sun came up eventually. I waited until the light was fully in the sky before I unzipped the tent and stepped out. Everything looked normal. The bag with my food was untouched. My gear was still where I'd left it. I walked over to the tree where I thought I'd heard the scratching and found deep gouges in the bark. 3 of them, vertical, about shoulder height. Definitely not an animal. Not claw marks, something sharp, maybe a knife or rock. That was enough for me. I didn't waste time. I packed everything in under 15 minutes and was back on the trail, moving fast. I didn't stop. I barely drank water. Every time the trail curved or I passed a tree line, I checked behind me. Nothing. No movement. But I never shook the feeling that I was being watched. I got to the dirt road around noon, earlier than I expected. I called my dad and told him to come get me. When I got in the car, I told my family everything. My dad didn't say much on the way back, just kept his eyes on the road and his hands tight on the wheel. I could tell he was shaken. I haven't been back to that trail since. I still hike, still love the forest, but I stay on marked trails now and I always go with someone. I never reported it. Part of me didn't want to deal with the fallout of admitting I was camping illegally. But more than that, I didn't see a face. I didn't have a name. What would I even say? That someone stood outside my tent in the woods and hummed? All I know is that whoever that was, they were out there by choice. They weren't lost. They weren't camping. They came out there for some reason, and I just happened to be there too. I'll never forget the sound of that humming. I've always liked being alone in nature. I'm a 28-year-old woman and I solo travel a lot, mostly for peace of mind and to get away from noise. This past summer, I drove out to Moab, Utah to do some stargazing. I'd heard about how dark the skies could get out there, especially around canyonlands and arches, and I was excited. I wasn't going for hiking or crowds or anything touristy. I wanted silence, stars, and open space. I looked for a place to camp that was far from town. I didn't want streetlights or headlights or anyone's porch lights killing the view. After a few days of searching online, I came across this small, private ranch that shared a property line with the edge of Canyonlands National Park. The owner rented out areas of his land to campers. It looked legit, and the reviews all talked about how remote and quiet it was, so I booked a spot. When I got the directions, I realized how far out it actually was. I had to take a rough dirt road for miles. No signage, no cell signal, just dusty turns and scattered brush with huge red rock walls rising in the distance. It felt isolated in a way that I usually find comforting. When I finally got to the ranch, the owner wasn't around. He told me in advance to pick any flat area near the boundary fence, so I drove a bit further out and found a good spot at the far end of his land. Behind me was the ranch, silent and empty. In front of me was the park. Jagged sandstone towers, dry brush, and the kind of wilderness that felt untouched. I set up my heavy-duty canvas tent right on the edge, so to my right was just endless desert wilderness leading into the Needles district of Canyonlands. I spent most of the evening lying on my cot with the tent flap tied open, staring up at the stars. It was dead quiet. No bugs, no breeze, just silence. I remember thinking how strange it was not to hear even the usual outdoor background noise. No distant cars, no rustling leaves, nothing. Around 11:30 p.m., I shut the flap, zipped it all the way down, and lay back on the cot, still wide awake but too tired to keep my eyes open. The sky had been beautiful. No light pollution at all, just a billion stars above me. Right as I was starting to drift off, I heard footsteps on the gravel outside my tent. Off to the left, the ground was rocky, kind of loose gravel with some patches of packed dirt and dry brush. Any step made a sound. I froze. I didn't move, didn't breathe too hard. It was maybe 3-4 steps and then silence again. I waited. My heart was beating hard, but I didn't want to overreact. Could have been an animal, deer maybe, or a stray dog from the ranch. I stayed quiet and listened for more, but nothing followed. I told myself not to panic. After a while, I fell asleep. I woke up suddenly at 3:45 a.m. It wasn't a loud sound that woke me, more like a shift in the air. When everything has been perfectly still for hours, even a small change feels like a signal. At first, I thought maybe a gust of wind had come through, but then I heard it again, soft shuffling, this time to my right, the side of the tent that faced open desert. It was maybe 4 or 5 steps, spaced out like someone was trying to move carefully. I sat up slowly. My tent was sealed tight. I held my breath and listened. Again, it stopped completely, dead quiet. I tried to calm myself. It was probably an animal again. Nothing was brushing against the tent. There was no breathing, no grunting, no sniffing, which you'd expect from something like a coyote or raccoon. Just those slow, deliberate footsteps. Then, out of nowhere, there was a flash of light outside the tent. It looked exactly like a camera flash. That same fast pop of white, with a bright center that plumed out in a wide circle. It lasted maybe a second, then gone. My heart dropped into my stomach. It had come from the right side of the tent, maybe 10 or 15 feet away. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I sat frozen, listening as hard as I could. Nothing. My mind was racing. Maybe the owner had some kind of light system set up? Maybe a wildlife camera? But why would he put a camera with a flash right at the edge of the desert, facing nothing? And why would it go off randomly in the middle of the night? I stayed like that for maybe 20 minutes trying to rationalize it. Just when I was about to convince myself it was some weird camera on a timer or something, another flash went off, this time to the left side of the tent, closer, maybe 6 or 7 feet away. Same distinct pop, same plume of light. I could see the center of it, the bright circle, like someone was holding a camera with a flash bulb. And again, no sound, no footsteps, nothing. I started to feel sick. Kept happening. For the next couple of hours. A flash every 15-20 minutes. Sometimes further off. Sometimes so close I could see the canvas of the tent glow. Always from a different direction. Always dead silent before and after. At one point I started whispering to myself, just to feel like I wasn't losing my mind, just trying to stay still. My cot creaked every time I moved, so I stopped moving. I didn't unzip the flap, didn't look out. I didn't want to know. The final flash came around 6 a.m., just as the sky was starting to turn a dull gray. I remember because I could finally see the faintest outline of the tent ceiling. This flash wasn't out in the distance. It was right up against the tent door. It looked like someone had leaned in, put a camera directly up to the zipper, and snapped a picture. I saw the bright center burst of light, saw the slight curve of the zipper line glow from it. I felt my entire body lock up. I waited for a noise, for movement, for a shadow, but again, nothing. Just silence and that still, empty desert. As soon as the sun came up enough for me to see clearly, I unzipped the tent, grabbed everything, and packed up as fast as I could. I didn't stop to eat or change clothes. I didn't even roll up the tent properly. I just shoved it all into the back of my car and got out of there. The drive back down the dirt road felt endless. Every curve and dip felt like it was hiding something. I didn't see another soul the entire time. When I got back into Moab, I went straight to a gas station, locked myself in the bathroom, and sat on the floor for 10 minutes before I could even think straight. I thought about going to the police, but what would I even say? Someone took pictures of my tent in the dark? There were no photos, no proof, no damage, nothing stolen. Just flash after flash in the middle of the night with no sound and no clear source. I've tried to come up with rational explanations, wildlife cameras, heat lightning, maybe even some weird equipment from the park nearby, but none of it fits. Wildlife cameras don't move in circles around a tent. Lightning doesn't flash from 6 feet away in the shape of a bulb. And people don't take pictures of tents in complete silence without footsteps, without voices, without even triggering the tiniest sound of dry gravel shifting underfoot. Since that night, I've only solo camped in my car. I still go to remote places, but I keep the doors locked and the windows cracked. I sleep with my keys in hand. That was the last time I ever slept in a tent alone in the open. Whatever that was, it wasn't natural. And it wasn't nothing. Something was out there that night, and I'll never forget how close it got. I've spent most of my life out in the woods. Some people feel alive in cities, others on beaches. For me, it's been the forests and the desert. I can go days without seeing a person, and it feels more natural to me than hearing traffic or being around crowds. I grew up in northeastern Wisconsin, and even as a kid, I was always wandering the woods alone. My parents never stopped me. I guess they figured I had a good head on my shoulders, and truthfully, I think I did. I knew how to keep track of my surroundings, how to read the sun and recognize animal tracks. I felt at home out there. But sometimes, the woods have a way of reminding you that not everything belongs, or that not everything wants to be found. The first time I felt something truly off, I was about 12. It had rained the night before, and the ground was soaked. I was walking just a little off the main trail that looped around near an old beech grove I liked to sit under. I remember noticing how quiet everything was that morning. No wind, no birds, just the squish of mud under my boots. That was when I spotted it. Half buried in the mud near the roots of the beech tree was a small red shoe, toddler-sized. It looked like it had been there a while, but not years. There wasn't any rot. The color was still bright, just mud-crusted. I don't know why it made my stomach drop. I found weirder things out there before. Deer skulls, shotgun shells, even old TVs people dumped. But something about that shoe made the back of my neck prickle. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it for a while, then quietly walked away. It felt like I was being watched, but I didn't see anyone around. Still, that whole day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into someone else's space, a space I wasn't supposed to know about. That feeling came back a few years later. I was about 15 or 16 then, out wandering farther than usual, looking for a new area to camp for a weekend. It was still within what I considered my usual range, but deeper in the pine-covered part of the forest. I was walking along a slope when I saw a large black garbage bag tucked under a white pine tree. Now, curiosity gets the better of me more often than not, and I figured it was just trash. People dump all sorts of crap out there. But this one, I don't know. It didn't look torn up by animals. It was knotted tight, no smells, clean in a strange way. I poked it with a stick, and it was soft and heavy in a way that didn't feel like leaves or garbage. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I found a sharp stick and tore a hole near the top. Inside were gallon-sized Ziploc bags. They were tightly packed and filled with liquid, dark red. I pulled one out and just stared at it, and that's when it hit me, that cold, sharp kind of fear that you don't reason your way out of. Blood. It was blood. I dropped it back in the bag and stood there frozen for a minute. My brain tried to come up with something else it could be, like red paint or juice or something, but it wasn't. It was thick. It looked like it had settled. Whoever had put it there had taken the time to fill each bag and carefully pack them into a trash bag. I walked out of there immediately. I didn't run. I didn't want to make noise. I just left. I didn't tell anyone. Part of me didn't want to deal with what it meant, and the other part just didn't know what they could do about it. There are no rangers around most of those parts. No sheriff's office close by. If I reported it, maybe someone would investigate, maybe they wouldn't. But I also didn't want anyone thinking I had anything to do with it. So I kept my mouth shut. A few years later, when I was around 20, I was on a long hike through the wetlands east of our town. It's a narrow trail that winds around water, with thick cattails and muddy offshoots. It's not heavily trafficked. I'd been on that trail for hours when I noticed a break in the trees on the higher ground. Curious, I bushwhacked up through the brush. What I saw didn't make sense at first. It was a house, not a collapsed one, not a shack. A full, single-story house that looked like it had been built maybe 30 or 40 years ago, just sitting there with trees growing right up against the walls. There weren't any roads within 10 miles. Nothing that could explain how it got there. No power lines, no driveways, just a house sitting in the middle of the forest. I've explored abandoned buildings before. Barns, cabins, trailers, some long gone to rot. This one looked different. The windows were grimy but unbroken. The siding was faded but not decayed. The roof was intact. That unsettled me more than if it had been falling apart. It looked like someone had taken care of it for a while, then just disappeared. I walked around the back, where a screen door hung open. The inside was water damaged and musty, but intact. I stepped in slowly, one foot after the other, listening. No creaks, just the dripping of old water from somewhere. In the main room, there was an old couch, soaked and sagging, and a 1970s TV on a wooden stand. Everything was wet, rotting, and looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Books had swollen with moisture and fallen apart on the floor. I moved down the hallway and looked into the first bedroom. Nothing inside but an iron bed frame with no mattress. The second room was next to it. I peeked in, and that's when everything in me screamed to leave. This room had a mattress. Not new, but not old either. It was dirty, sure, but it didn't have the mold or leaf litter that everything else did. On top of the mattress was a Ziploc bag. Inside were toiletries, a bottle of shampoo, small tubes of ointment, a few folded pieces of paper. All of it looked recent, too recent. I stared at it for a few seconds, taking in the clean lines of the bottle, the fresh labels on the paper, and realized someone was living there, or had been very recently. Maybe they were out collecting food. Maybe they were watching me from the trees. I backed out of the room without touching anything. My heart was thumping, and every instinct told me to stay calm. I retraced my steps, out through the back door, past the TV, out into the trees. I didn't run, but I didn't waste time. I made it back to the trail and walked for nearly an hour before I stopped to drink water and catch my breath. Looking back now, it still unsettles me. I've thought about that house many times since then. It's still there. I know where it is, but I haven't gone back. I don't want to surprise whoever's staying there. I don't think they'd appreciate it. But mostly, I think about the situation. We don't have homeless people living out there. The winters are brutal, sometimes minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit with wind chill. It's not survivable without serious gear and preparation. There's no real infrastructure out here to support someone living rough in the woods. If someone is hiding in that house, they're doing it for a reason. Maybe it's fear. Maybe they're running from something. Or maybe they just don't want to be found. And honestly, I respect that. I've thought about what I'd do if I saw them. Maybe I'd offer them help, maybe leave food near the trail. I don't know, but I do know one thing. After all these years in the woods, I've learned to listen to my instincts. That cold feeling of dread isn't always something paranormal or imagined. Sometimes it's your body knowing something your mind hasn't figured out yet. And sometimes it's just a reminder that even in a place you think you know, there are things, people, moments, choices that exist in the cracks, hidden just far enough away to stay secret. It happened just 5 days ago, and I still can't shake it off. I live in South Carolina, in a quiet area where my backyard opens directly into a thick forest. It's peaceful most days. That Friday, March 21st, me, and my cousin decided we'd go on a one-day camping trip into the woods behind my house. We'd planned it out the night before while lying on the living room floor, maps, gear lists, and snacks spread out all over the place. The weather was finally starting to warm up after a long, wet winter, and we were excited to spend the day building a shelter and roughing it for fun like we used to. I was the first one up around 9:30 a.m. The house was still quiet, and sunlight was just starting to creep through the blinds. I woke my cousin up, and we both got our things ready. We had packed everything the night before: flashlights, knives, a lighter, water bottles, some protein bars, a tarp, rope, and even a small hatchet. I also brought a fully charged portable battery and my phone, even though there was barely any signal in the woods. We left the house a little after 10, walked across the backyard, and slipped into the tree line. The forest was a mess. A bad storm had come through around 6 months earlier, and the area still hadn't recovered. Fallen trees were everywhere. Big, thick pine trunks snapped in half, branches twisted and scattered all over the ground. You couldn't walk 10 feet without stepping over something or ducking under a low-hanging branch. And then there were these deep trenches, huge ruts maybe 5 feet deep and just as wide. They were all over, like someone had driven heavy machinery through the place when it was still wet and soft. You had to constantly watch your footing. It wasn't the kind of woods you could run through, that was for sure. We hiked for about an hour before we found a spot we liked. It was near a small creek that wound through the forest, hidden behind some thick brush. It was quiet there, peaceful almost. We cleared out a flat area and started building a little lean-to shelter with some branches, rope, and the tarp. It wasn't professional or anything, but it held together, and we were proud of it. We added a small fire pit with some rocks and gathered a bunch of dry sticks to get a fire going later. We weren't planning to stay overnight, but we liked to play survival and wanted to feel like we could live out there if we had to. That's when we started hearing the sounds. First, we both ignored it. We were focused on building the shelter. But after a while, the sounds became too frequent to write off. It sounded like chopping, not like a branch cracking from wind or an animal rustling. This was rhythmic, spaced out like someone was swinging an axe into a tree. Chop, pause, chop. Always a few seconds between. And then we heard splashing. Not huge splashes, but enough to be noticeable. We figured it was just animals or maybe something falling into the creek. We tried to stay calm. We'd both spent time in these woods. We knew the way back. And besides, we hadn't seen anyone else out here. But there was this tension that started to build in the air, like something was off. I was working on the final layer of branches for the roof, trying to wedge them in tight so they wouldn't slide off if the wind picked up. My cousin was working on the sides, building up some insulation with dead leaves and bark. That's when I heard it, a human voice. It was soft, too soft to make out the words, but it was the kind of tone someone uses when calling a dog over to them. Like a low whistle or a "here boy" sort of thing. It came from somewhere behind the trees, maybe 50 or 60 feet out. I froze. I looked up, expecting to maybe see another hiker or someone out with a dog, but the trees were thick and shadowed. I couldn't see anything, just the endless brown and green. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to scare my cousin. He's younger than me, a little more nervous when it comes to things like this. But I told him to watch the woods while I started packing our stuff. We didn't have much unpacked anyway, just a few tools and our snacks, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I handed him the flashlight and had him take the lead. He knew the woods better than I did, and I figured if someone was out there, I'd rather be the one behind. That way, if anything happened, it'd be me they saw first. As we walked away from the site, I kept glancing back over my shoulder, trying not to make it obvious. The forest was still, too still. No birds chirping, no branches cracking, just silence. And then I saw him. He was standing maybe 20 feet behind our shelter, half hidden behind a broken tree, dressed in black, head covered with some kind of mask. I couldn't make out the details. Maybe it was a ski mask or a hood or even just paint, but I knew it wasn't right. He was just standing there, watching us, not moving, not calling out, just staring. I felt my heart pounding in my throat. But again, I didn't say a word. I didn't scream or shout or even whisper to my cousin. I just kept walking faster, urging him to pick up the pace. Every now and then, I glanced back, first, I didn't see him anymore. I thought maybe I'd imagined it, that I was just paranoid. But about halfway back to the tree line, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. He was still there, running, not straight at us, but darting from tree to tree, always staying just at the edge of my sight. Quick movements, silent, like he was trying to follow us but not be seen. I started breathing faster. My chest felt tight. Every crunch of a leaf behind us made me jump. But I still didn't tell my cousin. I didn't want to scare him into running. That would have made everything worse. We had to stay calm. Took about 30 minutes to get close to the edge of the woods. That last 100 feet was the hardest part. My house was just barely visible through the gaps in the trees, but it felt miles away. Every step felt like something was watching us, following us. I didn't dare look back again. I just kept walking, trying not to trip over the roots or branches. I could hear my cousin's breathing getting faster. I think he knew something was wrong too, but he didn't say anything either. When we finally broke through the trees and stepped into the backyard, we both ran, full sprint, dropped everything on the porch, slammed the back door shut, and locked it. Only then did we speak. And when my cousin looked at me and said he saw the man too, running from tree to tree, I knew I hadn't imagined it. He described the same exact thing I'd seen. Same black clothes, same mask, same weird movements, always just barely visible, never close enough to confront, never far enough to ignore. We stood in the kitchen for a long time, not speaking much, just catching our breath. I went upstairs, looked out from my window into the woods. Nothing, just trees. But I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying everything in my head. The sounds, the silence, the man. I tried to come up with a reason. A hunter? A prankster? But why the mask? Why follow us? Why stay hidden like that? I haven't gone back into those woods since. I haven't even walked near the tree line. I told my parents we saw a snake so they wouldn't ask too many questions, but I know what I saw. We both do. Someone was out there, watching us, maybe waiting. And I truly believe if I hadn't heard that voice, if I hadn't been paying attention, if we'd stayed even a little longer, he would have done something bad. I don't know what his intentions were, and I don't ever want to find out. Those woods aren't safe anymore. Not for me, not after what happened. I was 8 years old when we first moved into the house on the edge of the forest. It was a 2-story place with an old stone chimney and faded white siding, sitting a bit isolated with no neighbors for at least a few hundred feet. The backyard stretched far and wide, and then, without any warning or fence or break, it became thick forest. The trees were tall and close together, some with gnarled branches, and during the summer they formed a kind of green wall. In the winter, when the leaves fell, it was just as eerie, bare branches like twisted fingers reaching into the cold sky. My parents weren't thrilled about the forest, but the price on the house was good. Dad liked the idea of space and quiet. He worked from home and said he could focus better out there. Mom was more focused on the actual house, which had big windows and a spacious kitchen. My siblings and I were too young to worry about much. We just saw a huge backyard and a giant place to explore. But right from the beginning, our dogs didn't like it. We had 2, Scout, a black lab mix, and Tilly, a golden retriever. They were both friendly and curious dogs, but they never wanted to go near the forest. They would sniff near the tree line and then back away with their tails tucked. If we accidentally threw a ball or toy too far and it landed just past the first trees, they would bark and whine until we got it ourselves. They didn't act like that anywhere else. At first, we thought maybe it was a scent. Maybe there were wild animals living nearby, bears, foxes, coyotes, but we never saw anything. No tracks, no torn trash cans, nothing. Sometimes they would both sit near the glass door to the backyard, just staring into the woods. Every now and then, one of them would growl low in their throat. The weirdest part was they only ever reacted to the forest. They never behaved that way on walks around the neighborhood or when we took them into town. At night, it felt different out there. You'd be in the backyard, and you'd hear twigs snap, dry leaves crunch, Not loud, not like something running, but like someone walking slow, measured steps. If you turned around fast enough, sometimes you'd think you caught a shadow moving, but it was never clear. Just a flash of something upright and human-shaped, gone before your brain could catch up. The air always felt colder near the tree line, even in summer. Mom and Dad laid down rules pretty quick. No going into the forest alone. No staying out after sunset. Don't wander out of sight of the house. We followed the rules for the most part. But even in the daytime, something about that forest felt wrong. You could hear birds and squirrels and all the normal sounds, but sometimes everything would go quiet, no wind, no animals, no nothing. Just this weird, pressing silence. My sister had the room that faced the backyard. Her window looked right out over the lawn and into the woods. One night, she told me later, she woke up and saw something at the edge of the trees. Not moving, just standing there. She said it was taller than a person and seemed like it was leaning forward slightly, like it was watching the house. But it looked wrong, like it wasn't fully standing on the ground. She froze and just stared. She said she blinked and it was gone. Just disappeared in the same second a flashlight beam from our dad swept over the yard. He had come outside after she called for him. But there was nothing. Not long after, we started hearing knocking on the back door at night. Always soft at first. 3 or 4 slow knocks, then silence. Sometimes it would happen for a few nights in a row, then nothing for weeks. My parents thought it was bored kids playing a prank. They started ignoring it. Until one night when it was raining hard, sheets of water coming down, wind shaking the trees, and the knocking got loud. Sharp.
Urgent.
My mom opened the door thinking maybe someone was stranded in the storm, but there was no one there. The porch was dry. No footprints. No wet spots. Just the wind and the dark. After that night, they put up a motion-activated security camera pointing at the back door. It never caught anything knocking. But one night, my brother, he was about 10 by then, started sleepwalking. He opened the back door and started walking toward the woods. My mom caught him just in time. The dogs were barking their heads off. It happened again a couple weeks later. Same thing. Door creaked open quietly. He walked outside, barefoot, no coat, always in the same direction towards the woods. We looked at the footage. It showed him stepping outside, pausing on the porch like he was listening to something, then shaking his head a little and slowly walking forward like he was being guided. Not dragged, not yanked, but like someone was gently urging him forward and he couldn't resist. It was creepy in a slow, quiet way. No jump scares, just this sense that something was drawing him. A few months later, my dad was outside fixing the fence that separated our yard from the driveway. It was getting dark, and he heard my sister calling for him from the trees. She sounded hurt, scared. He dropped his tools and ran in, calling to her. But the deeper he went, the harder it was to tell where the voice was coming from. It echoed strangely, like the trees were bouncing the sound around. He finally ran back inside to grab a flashlight, only to find my sister sitting at the kitchen table, doing homework. She hadn't even been outside that day. My dad didn't tell us what had happened. Maybe he didn't want to scare us. But a couple months later, something similar happened to me. I was in the yard with the dogs one evening, kicking a ball around. I heard my mom calling from the woods. She said she needed help. Her sweater was caught on a branch, and she couldn't reach it. It didn't strike me as weird at the time. It was her voice, casual, not panicked. I started walking toward the trees. The dogs went nuts, barking, snapping at my heels, circling me. I kept going, not even thinking about it, until I heard my dad yelling from the window. He said Mom was inside, and I needed to come back right now. After that, they had a tall wooden fence built around the backyard. It didn't stop the sounds, though. Scratching on the wood at night. Tap, tap, tap on the windows, like someone was checking each one to see if it would open. The knocking at the door started again, louder and more frequent. Sometimes I'd wake up to find Scout sitting rigid at the back door, ears perked, staring into the dark like he was waiting for something to come in. The last few weeks before we moved were the worst. My brother's sleepwalking got worse. He tried to leave through windows, once even tried to unlock the front door in the middle of the night. One time he made it all the way to the backyard. He woke up standing at the fence, facing the forest, just standing there, barefoot in the cold, unmoving with both dogs barking and whining behind him. The night before we left, we checked everything, locked every door, every window. The camera showed nothing unusual, but in the morning, the back door was wide open, just swinging gently. No wind, no forced lock, nothing on the footage. It was like it had opened by itself. We moved out the next day. My brother doesn't sleepwalk anymore, but he still gets night terrors and he's developed pretty bad anxiety. None of us really talk about what happened. Sometimes when we're together, it'll come up. Usually as a joke, like my brother did recently when he called me out of the blue. He laughed and said maybe something had gotten in that last night. Maybe it followed us. He was trying to be light, but I could tell he wasn't joking completely. I still get uneasy in the woods. Even parks with dense trees make my skin crawl. I don't know what it was. I never saw anything clear. No monsters, no ghosts. Just glimpses and sounds and shadows that didn't act right. Something was out there, though. Something patient. Something that didn't need to rush. It waited years, but it was always there, watching,